come up and vacuum, fuel pressure goes right back down to about 45, 46. Welcome back to the channel. Appreciate you guys and gals for watching along. Stocking cap. It's still spring in the heartland. We're swinging 50 degrees, boys and girls. We're gonna change gears just a little bit on you today and deal with something a little bit newer. This is a 2001 Yukon. Came in for an oil leak. I do some work on this gentleman's older vehicles. You know, once you get to a point where they're comfortable with you, they start bringing you everything, which is fine. This had an oil leak. We dealt with that, but we also hooked up our little cheapo Harbor Freight scan tool to it, and it's been carrying around codes. Now, the particular codes this thing was throwing at us were a 0171, which I think is lean in bank 1, and 0174, which was a lean condition in cylinder bank number 2. So basically the engine's running lean. Now, last summer we did some service work to this car and had the same codes. At that time, talked to the customer a little bit about it. The fuel filter was fairly plugged up on it, so we threw a fuel filter in it, needed it anyway, did some service work, a couple little minor repairs, and I said, hey, well, drive it and, you know, we'll see how it does. He didn't mention a check engine light coming on, but it has somewhere since then set the same codes again. So kind of out of curiosity, I went back and reviewed the record just to make sure I knew what we did before. And yeah, fuel filter, that kind of thing. Now, I have a sneaky suspicion that this thing's got a fuel pump that just isn't quite happy. And I think it's a good opportunity for me to kind of show you with kind of sort of limited resources to the high-tech, you know, really big and intricate scan tools on how maybe we can, you know, diagnose this fuel pump. So on this, I don't know what generation LS this is, but 5.3 Vortec, we do have a Schrader valve that we can mechanically check fuel pressure on the engine. That's very handy. Some of the new cars, they're going away from this. They want you to have to take it to the dealer or to somebody with one of them big fancy scan tools. Okay, so this is a mechanical fuel gauge. You can get these at the Irish Parts Store, Napa Valley. They even, I think, have the loaner ones where you can use it and then take it back. So this is kind of step one. We're going to go ahead and crank this thing back up. Oh, and just for the records, this is pressurized fuel here, so when you screw this in, it's a Schrader valve. It'll squirt a little bit out at you. So put a rag under here or something to check it, and then make sure you do get this good and snug. There's an O-ring in here, so you shouldn't have to really crank on it, but get it, you know, just snug it up so it doesn't leak and make fire. Let's start this puppy up. It does start and run pretty darn good. Now, according to all the resources that I can find, we're looking for 55 to 62 pounds of fuel pressure. And we are at about 45. So we're a little low. Don't break the fuel pressure yet. And then let's see. We can't really get to that 55 mark at all. Now, it does seem to run okay, but what you're going to notice if you find yourself in this position is you're going to have maybe a random misfire every once in a while. or when you go to pass somebody and give it the onions, you just may not feel like you're getting all the onions. So we're at about 45. Now, it doesn't tell you right there that the fuel pump is weak or bad. It could be there's a regulator. Again, this generation LS, on this side of the fuel rail, there's a fuel pressure regulator right here. It is vacuum operated. Okay, so at idle, where the car should not require a bunch of extra fuel, it regulates the pressure down a little bit. Now when you open the throttle, the vacuum disappears, at least momentarily, until things even out, and at that point then it gives extra fuel. So let's go and check this guy. We'll see first of all if it's you know, showing any signs of being bad, and then we'll play with the vacuum a little bit and show you, you know, how to narrow down between regulator and pump. Now the second couple tests, you simply get one of these little Mighty Vac. It's a vacuum pump, and you can also use it as a vacuum gauge. We have a different vacuum gauge around here, but for this particular test, we're just going to use this one tool to further diagnose this fuel pressure issue. First thing we're going to do is disconnect the vacuum line from the regulator and plug it. So now this is receiving no vacuum. That should have helped our pressure out a little bit, and it did. That got us right to 55, the bottom end of what's acceptable. So that means the regulator's doing something. Now we're going to put on a little piece of hose, just vacuum hose, plug it into our vacuum pump. We're going to bring this up to about 17 pounds, or 17 pounds. We're going to bring this up to about 17 inch-pounds of vacuum, and let's watch the fuel pressure. We come up in vacuum, fuel pressure goes right back down to about 45, 46. All right, fine. So it would appear as though our fuel pressure regulator is operating, and probably operating correctly. What else can we look at to further diagnose this and narrow it down to the pump? All right, we're inside the car now, and here's the next tool we'll need. We will need some sort of a code scanner, reader, eraser, but one that has live data down here. You want to be able to look at some of this stuff, and we're just going to click on this. Live data can be kind of helpful because you can look and see what certain sensors are pulling for voltage and percentages, and then you can compare that to the specs that you can find online. But for this particular diagnosis, we're going to look at fuel trims, and what you have is short-term fuel trim, STFT, and long-term fuel trim, LTFT, for bank 1 and for bank 2. I apologize, this is an LCD screen, so you may not be seeing any of this. But when you're looking at short-term fuel trim is kind of living in the here and now. It's things like hard acceleration, deceleration. It's going to make changes to the fuel trim pretty much instantaneous to how the car is being driven and how it's acting. Now long term, those are things like, you know, making long-term adjustments for altitude and other conditions that, you know, use stored data and use information from sensors that are downstream. Basically, it's looking at a longer term picture. So right now, if you can't read this, short-term fuel trim is just happy. It's bouncing around just below and just above 0. However, long-term fuel trim for both sides is, you know, 5-ish, 6-ish. And you know, that's kind of high. Usually the short term will try to correct that, but those numbers right now, we've got bank 1 at 5.5 and bank 2 going between 6.3 and 7.7. That's a little high, but manageable. Now let's give it some fuel and let's see where we go. We'll get it to about 1500 RPMs without a load. And now we've got short-term fuel trim still bouncing around between plus and minus 5%, but our long-term fuel trim for bank 1 and bank 2, one is 15, one is 19. That's not good. That means we're not getting fuel, enough fuel. It's constantly trying to add almost 20% fuel to the mix here. Now that was at about 17 inches of vacuum. Now we've already kind of told you how the regulator works. If you take the vacuum away, it should release more fuel. So let's do that now. We've just released all the vacuum. We've got our fuel pressure back up to about 55, about 54. Let's check our fuel trims now. So now we're back with the scan tool after a couple minutes, and we're watching short terms are still bouncing around, maybe a little more negative because they're correcting, they've got a little more fuel to work with. But the big one here is long-term fuel trim is now reading for bank 1 only 5.5% and bank 2 7. So that's a clear indicator it's much happier with that extra 9 pounds of fuel pressure than it was at 45. And when it gets it, life is pretty good. So without a giant fancy, you know, computer connected, a little computer, $80 or so I think those little scan tools are, the one I have there from the freight harbor. But yeah, fuel pressure tester, a little bit of vacuum gauge work, vacuum pump work, and then a fairly basic code reader. As long as you have live data, you can look at this stuff. And now we've narrowed down that pressure regulator's working well. We had at best marginal fuel pressure, and when we bypass the regulator and give it all the fuel available, it's still not quite happy. And we know we put a fuel filter on it not too long ago. So we need to have a little talk with the customer and see. Now, here's the other issue we got is, let me pull up. If you can see that fuel gauge up there, they just topped this puppy off. So my recommendation is going to be, hey, go put a couple 100 miles on this thing. You might get a light if it's running, appropriately for the most part. Let's burn through about 3/4 of this tank of fuel, and then we'll drop a tank and we'll put a fuel pump in it, maybe, if they want to. You don't have to have the full data computer Monty. Between the $20 Mighty Vac, the $30 vacuum gauge, and the $70 code reader, which is handy to have regardless, you've got $120, right? Yeah, about 120 bucks into, the tools that you need to diagnose this and be comfortable with your diagnoses. That's a quick one. Hope you liked it. Hope you got something out of it. If you got comments, suggestions, any of the other stuff, tippy tap the keyboard, let us know. We're going to get on to classics again, and appreciate you guys and gals watching our stuff. See you on the next video.